I've been a patrol officer with the Riverside Police Department for 8 years, and what I discovered on March 15, 2023, still makes me check my own neighbors twice when I get home from my shift. What started as a routine wellness check turned into something that changed how I think about the people we see every day in our communities. Some cases stick with you because of the violence, others because of the tragedy. This one haunts me because of how perfectly normal everything seemed until it wasn't. It was around 2:30 p.m. on a Tuesday when the call came in. I was driving Unit 23, a 2020 Ford Explorer Police Interceptor, patrolling the Maple Heights subdivision, one of those quiet residential areas with well-maintained lawns and the kind of neighbors who actually know each other's names. The kind of place where kids still ride bikes without helmets, and people leave their garage doors open while they're working in their backyards. The dispatcher's voice crackled through my radio. Unit 23, respond to 847 Birch Lane for a welfare check. Caller reports not seeing elderly resident for several days, mail piling up. I'd been to Birch Lane plenty of times before. It was the kind of street where the biggest problems were usually noise complaints about teenagers playing music too loud, or the occasional domestic dispute that turned out to be someone's TV volume set too high. As I pulled up to 847, I noticed it immediately, a modest 2-story house with faded blue siding, newspapers scattered on the front porch like fallen leaves, and an overflowing mailbox that looked ready to burst. The silver 2016 Honda Accord in the driveway looked like it hadn't moved in days, covered in a thick layer of pollen and morning dew that had dried into crusty yellow patches. Before approaching the house, I decided to canvass the neighbor's first standard procedure for welfare checks. Sometimes family members are just visiting, or the person is in the hospital, and neighbors usually know more than they realize. The woman who called it in, Mrs. Patterson from 849 Birch Lane, met me at her front door before I could even knock. She was probably in her 70s, wearing a floral housecoat and slippers, the kind of woman who probably knew everyone's business on the block. "Officer, thank goodness you're here," she said, wrapping her cardigan tighter around herself despite the mild spring weather. "I haven't seen Harold in almost a week. He usually waves from his window every morning when I get my paper, but—" She trailed off, pointing toward the house next door with a shaky finger. "Harold?" I asked, pulling out my notepad and pen. "Harold Morrison. He's lived there for, must be 15 years now. Quiet man, keeps to himself mostly, but he's always been friendly. We chat over the fence sometimes about the weather, you know how it is. Nothing deep, but he's always pleasant." She paused, looking genuinely worried. "He's probably in his 70s, and at that age you never know." I nodded, making notes in my careful handwriting. "When did you last see him, exactly?" "Last Wednesday morning. I remember because it was garbage day, and he always puts his bin out earlier than the rest of us. He's very punctual about things like that. But this week, his garbage is still sitting there." She gestured toward the side of Harold's house where a green plastic bin sat untouched, looking somehow forlorn in the afternoon sunlight. I thanked Mrs. Patterson and told her I'd look into it, then walked across the street to talk to the neighbor directly opposite. The house was a neat ranch style with a well-maintained garden, and an elderly man named Frank Williams answered the door after I knocked. He was probably around the same age as Mrs. Patterson, wearing work clothes that suggested he'd been doing yard work. "Police?" he asked, squinting at my uniform. "Everything all right, officer?" When I mentioned Harold Morrison, his weathered face lit up with immediate recognition. "Oh sure, Harold. Good neighbor. We don't talk much, he's not the chatty type, but he's always out there in his yard, keeping an eye on things. Makes us all feel safer, you know? Guy like that, always watching out for the neighborhood." Frank scratched his gray head thoughtfully. "Come to think of it, I haven't seen him working in his garden lately. Usually see him every few days, pruning those rose bushes of his or sweeping his walkway." "What kind of man would you say Harold is?" I asked. "Reliable. That's the word I'd use. If something's not right on the block, Harold notices. Last year when the Martinez family went on vacation and forgot to stop their newspaper delivery, Harold collected them so it wouldn't look like nobody was home. Didn't make a big deal about it, just did it. Frank nodded approvingly. World needs more neighbors like Harold Morrison. I continued down the street, talking to 5 more neighbors over the next 20 minutes. Every single one knew Harold Morrison. They all described him the same way: quiet, friendly, helpful when needed, but not intrusive. The woman at 835, Jennifer Chin, mentioned how he'd helped her carry groceries once when she was struggling with too many bags. He just appeared, she said, like he'd been watching and noticed I needed help. Very gentlemanly about it. The family at 851, the Johnsons, said he'd wave to their kids from his porch. Our youngest, Tommy, he's 8, and he always waves back, Mrs. Johnson told me. Harold remembers the kids' names, asks how they're doing in school when he sees us. The kind of neighbor you want when you have children. But something was bothering me as I walked back toward 847, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. All these neighbors knew Harold, had interacted with him, but their descriptions were strangely uniform. They all used similar words: reliable, quiet, helpful, watchful. It was like he perfected the art of being just visible enough to belong without anyone knowing him well enough to notice inconsistencies. I approached Harold's front door and knocked loudly, using my authoritative cop knock. Police! Wellness check! No response. I waited 30 seconds and knocked again, harder this time. Mr. Morrison! Police! Still nothing. I tried the doorbell. It echoed inside the house with that hollow sound that suggests emptiness, but no footsteps followed. Walking around the perimeter of the house, I peered through windows, trying to get a sense of the interior. The blinds were drawn on most windows, but through a gap in the kitchen window, I could see mail scattered across a counter and what looked like takeout containers that had been sitting there long enough to suggest abandonment. That's when I noticed something that made my cop instincts start tingling. The back door had a heavy-duty deadbolt lock, the kind you see on security-conscious people's homes, but it also had something else that seemed out of place for this quiet neighborhood. A small, professional-grade security camera was positioned to capture anyone approaching the rear entrance. The camera housing looked expensive, weatherproof, the kind of equipment that costs serious money. I radioed for backup and requested contact information for the property owner, then decided to take another walk around the property while waiting. That's when I found something that really got my attention: a small gap in the basement window well that had been covered with a piece of plywood. The wood wasn't weathered like it should have been if it had been there for months or years. The edges were clean, the screws still shiny. This was recent work. My backup arrived just as I was examining the plywood more closely: Officer Martinez in a 2019 Chevrolet Tahoe. Elena Martinez was a good cop, thorough and intuitive, the kind of partner you want when something doesn't feel right. What V we got? She asked, approaching with that careful awareness that experienced officers develop. Welfare check. That's getting weird, I told her, filling her in on the neighbors' descriptions and the security camera. That's when dispatch came back with information that made my stomach drop and the hair on my arms stand up. Unit 23, be advised. Property records show 847 Birch Lane is owned by Harold Morrison, but there's a flag in the system. Subject Harold Morrison was reported deceased in Phoenix, Arizona, in December 2021. Natural causes, verified death certificate on file with Maricopa County. Martinez and I looked at each other, that moment of realization passing between us that cops experience when a routine call suddenly becomes something much more serious. So who the hell have these neighbors been talking to for 15 years? She asked, voicing exactly what I was thinking. We immediately called for a supervisor and requested a locksmith, then began treating the scene as a potential crime scene. While waiting, I decided to go back to Mrs. Patterson's house with some follow-up questions, this time with a very different perspective. Mrs. Patterson invited me in for coffee, and I accepted, hoping a more relaxed setting might help her remember details she hadn't thought were important before. Mrs. Patterson, I need you to think carefully. Can you describe Harold for me? Physical appearance, mannerisms, anything distinctive? She paused, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. Well, he's average height, I'd say. Maybe 5'10" or so. Always wore a baseball cap, one of those plain navy blue ones, so I never saw much of his hair. Kept a neat beard, gray and well-trimmed. Dressed nicely for yard work, usually in those pressed khaki pants and button-up shirts, even when he was gardening. What about his voice? Any accent or distinguishing speech patterns? Another pause, longer this time, and I could see her thinking hard. You know, officer, that's a good question. We never talked for very long. He was polite, always said hello, but, now that you mention it, I don't think I could pick his voice out of a crowd. He usually just waved or nodded when he was farther away. She frowned, setting down her coffee cup. Is everything all right? You're asking very specific questions. I didn't answer directly, but continued probing. Did Harold ever invite you over? Or did you ever go inside his house for any reason? Oh no, nothing like that. Harold was private, respectful of boundaries. But he was always there when you needed him to be, if that makes sense. Like when the Thompsons' house got broken into 2 years ago, Harold was the one who called it in. Said he'd seen suspicious activity around midnight. My radio crackled. The locksmith had arrived, along with Sergeant Rodriguez, my supervisor. The locksmith worked for about 10 minutes before the front door of 847 Birch Lane swung open, revealing something that immediately felt wrong. The house was furnished and lived in, but it felt staged, like a model home designed to look occupied but lacking the personal touches that make a space feel genuinely inhabited by someone with a real life. In the living room, we found what explained everything and made it infinitely more disturbing. Along the far wall were 4 large monitors connected to a sophisticated camera and recording system. The screens showed live feeds from multiple angles around the neighborhood, street views from several positions, at least 6 different houses from various angles, the small park at the end of the block, even what appeared to be interior shots through windows where blinds weren't properly closed. Martinez whistled low. Jesus Christ. How long has this been going on? We found more equipment in the basement, additional recording devices, file cabinets full of photographs, and detailed notes about every resident on the street. Not just basic information, but schedules, habits, visitors, family dynamics. The files went back years. One folder was labeled Operational Security. Inside were photos of both the real Harold Morrison and his imposter. The fake Harold had clearly studied the real one extensively. There were photos showing him practicing Morrison's posture, his way of walking, even his gardening techniques. The most disturbing file was labeled Neighborhood Integration Timeline. It documented a systematic process of replacing Harold Morrison so gradually that no one noticed the substitution. The imposter had started by simply continuing Harold's established routines, slowly building relationships based on Morrison's existing reputation. We found no identification for the imposter anywhere in the house. Whoever he was, he'd completely erased his real identity to become someone else. We never found him. By the time we'd pieced together what was happening, he was long gone. The Honda Accord had belonged to the real Harold Morrison and had been sitting there since his death. Our imposter had been coming and going through that basement entrance, probably parking elsewhere. The case was turned over to detectives, and they'd connected similar operations in 3 other cities. Always the same pattern: a deceased resident whose identity gets assumed by someone who then embeds themselves as the perfect neighbor. What haunts me most is how easily he fooled everyone. 15 years of neighbors who thought they knew Harold Morrison, who felt safer because he was watching. And the whole time, they were the ones being watched. Now when I drive through residential areas, I wonder, how many of these friendly neighbors are exactly who they appear to be? Have you ever had a neighbor who seemed almost too perfect? Someone who was always around but you realized you didn't really know anything personal about them. 3 weeks after the Harold Morrison case, I thought I'd seen the worst of what people could hide in plain sight. I was wrong. What my partner and I discovered during our night shift patrol on April 8, 2023, in downtown Bakersfield proved that sometimes the most disturbing secrets aren't hidden in suburban homes, they're buried right beneath our feet in places no one thinks to look. I was working the graveyard shift that night, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., partnered with Officer Jake Thompson in Unit 47, a 2018 Dodge Charger. Thompson had been on the force for 12 years, mostly working nights by choice. He said he preferred the rhythm of night patrol, different calls, different problems, and fewer supervisors breathing down your neck. We'd been partners for about 6 months, and I'd learned to trust his instincts about when something didn't feel right. It was around 2:15 a.m. when we got the call that would change everything. Dispatch crackled through our radio. Units 47 and 52, respond to the 800 block of Industrial Boulevard. Anonymous caller reports strange sounds and lights coming from the vacant lot behind the old Peterson manufacturing building. Possible homeless encampment or drug activity. I knew the area well. Industrial Boulevard was one of those stretches of the city that had seen better days: abandoned warehouses, empty lots overgrown with weeds, and the occasional business struggling to survive. The Peterson manufacturing building had been vacant for over 3 years, ever since the company relocated to Mexico. The lot behind it was about 2 acres of cracked concrete and scattered debris, surrounded by a chain-link fence that had more holes than barriers. Probably just some tweakers cooking meth, Thompson said as we pulled up to the location. Or homeless folks trying to stay warm. Either way, we need to check it out. We parked on Industrial Boulevard and grabbed our flashlights. The night was overcast, no moon visible through the thick clouds, and the nearest street light was half a block away. Our flashlight beams cut through the darkness as we approached the fence line, looking for the sounds or lights the caller had reported. At first, everything seemed normal. The lot was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic from the interstate and the occasional rustle of wine through the weeds. But as we walked along the fence, Thompson suddenly stopped and held up his hand. "You hear that?" he whispered. I listened carefully. There it was, a faint mechanical humming sound, almost like a generator running, but muffled, like it was coming from underground. And there was something else, a rhythmic tapping or hammering that seemed to echo from somewhere beneath us. "Where's that coming from?" I asked, scanning the empty lot with my flashlight. Thompson was already moving toward a section of the fence where someone had cut a large opening in the chain link. "Over here. And look at this." He pointed his flashlight at the ground near the fence opening. The dirt and gravel showed clear tire tracks, recent ones, maybe from a pickup truck or van, leading into the lot, and then they just stopped about 50 feet in, like the vehicle had disappeared. We squeezed through the fence opening and followed the tire tracks. They led to what looked like just another patch of overgrown weeds and scattered concrete debris. But as we got closer, Thompson's flashlight beam caught something that made us both freeze. Partially hidden beneath a piece of rusted sheet metal and some strategically placed weeds was a heavy steel door, painted dark green to blend with the surroundings. It was maybe 3 feet square, with heavy-duty hinges and what looked like a serious locking mechanism. The humming sound was definitely coming from below this door. "What the hell?" Thompson muttered, crouching down to examine it more closely. "This thing is camouflaged. Someone went to a lot of trouble to hide it." The door had a small ventilation grate near the top, and when I put my ear close to it, I could hear the mechanical sounds more clearly. Generator running, definitely. But also what sounded like machinery, maybe power tools, and voices, at least 2 different people talking, though I couldn't make out words. "We need backup," I said, reaching for my radio. "And we need to figure out what we're dealing with before we go knocking on any underground doors." Thompson nodded and began examining the area around the hidden entrance while I called for additional units. As we waited, we discovered that this wasn't just some crude hole in the ground. The entrance was professionally constructed, with proper drainage around the edges and what looked like electrical conduits running beneath the surface. Someone had invested serious time and money into building whatever was down there. Units 52 and 61 arrived within 10 minutes. Officers Patricia Valdez and Mike Chin in a 2017 Ford Explorer, and Officers David Kim and Sarah Rodriguez in a 2019 Chevrolet Tahoe. Valdez had been on the force for 15 years and had worked narcotics before transferring to patrol. When I filled her in on what we'd found, her expression grew grim. "Underground drug labs are getting more common," she said, examining the hidden door with her flashlight. Harder to detect, easier to ventilate properly, and if they're deep enough, the sound doesn't carry. But this looks more sophisticated than anything I've seen. We tried listening at the ventilation grate again. The voices were clearer now, definitely at least two men talking, but the conversation was muffled by the steel door and whatever insulation might be below. The mechanical sounds continued steadily. Could be a grow operation, Officer Chin suggested. Those require a lot of electrical equipment, ventilation systems, lighting. Would explain the generator and the professional construction. But something about the setup bothered me. The location was too exposed for a major drug operation. Industrial Boulevard had regular patrol traffic, and while the lot was vacant, it wasn't isolated enough for the kind of security a large-scale operation would require. Sergeant Williams arrived about 20 minutes later, along with a locksmith the department sometimes used for special situations. After examining the scene and hearing our assessment, he made the decision to attempt entry. "Whatever's down there, it's not legal," he said. "Anonymous tip, suspicious activity, hidden entrance, we've got probable cause to investigate. But we go slow and careful. If this is a drug lab, there could be hazardous chemicals. If it's something else..." He didn't finish the sentence. The locksmith worked on the door for nearly 30 minutes. It had multiple locks and what appeared to be an electronic component as well. When it finally opened, we were hit with a rush of warm air that carried the smell of electronics, metal, and something else I couldn't identify. The door opened onto a set of concrete steps leading down into darkness. Our flashlights revealed that the stairway was professionally constructed, with handrails and proper lighting fixtures, though the lights were currently off. The humming sound was much louder now, and we could hear the voices more clearly, two men having what sounded like a normal conversation about technical procedures. Sergeant Williams took point, with Thompson and me following. The stairway descended about 12 feet before opening into what I can only describe as a fully equipped underground bunker. The space was larger than I'd expected, maybe 20 by 30 feet, with concrete walls, a properly installed electrical system, and sophisticated ventilation equipment. But it wasn't a drug lab. The bunker was set up like a combination surveillance center and weapons cache. One wall was lined with monitors showing live feeds from cameras positioned around the city, and I recognized some of the locations. There were views of the police station parking lot, the courthouse steps, several government buildings, and what looked like the interiors of businesses downtown. Another wall had racks of weapons, not just handguns, but assault rifles, ammunition, and what looked like tactical gear. Everything was organized and maintained like a military armory. The two men inside were so focused on their equipment that they didn't notice us until Sergeant Williams announced our presence. "Police! Nobody move!" Both men spun around, hands reaching instinctively toward weapons that were fortunately out of reach. One was in his 40s, wearing military-style clothing and tactical boots. The other was younger, maybe late 20s, dressed in civilian clothes but with the kind of alert posture that suggested military or law enforcement training. "Hands where we can see them," Thompson commanded, his service weapon drawn but not aimed directly at either man. "Step away from the equipment." The older man raised his hands slowly but didn't look particularly surprised or panicked. "Officers," he said calmly, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. We're conducting authorized surveillance activities." "Authorized by who?" Sergeant Williams demanded, keeping his weapon ready while Valdez moved to secure the weapons rack. "That's classified information," the man replied. "I'm going to reach for my identification very slowly." He moved his hand toward his jacket pocket with deliberate, non-threatening movements. What he pulled out was a federal identification card that made Sergeant Williams pause. The ID looked legitimate, Department of Homeland Security, complete with photo and official seals. The man's name was listed as Agent Marcus Webb. "We're monitoring potential domestic terrorism activities in this area," Webb said, his voice maintaining that same calm, professional tone. "This operation has been ongoing for 8 months. The younger man remained silent, hands still raised, but his eyes were alert and calculating. His identification, when he produced it, showed him as Agent David Foster, also DHS. But something felt wrong. The setup was too elaborate, too permanent for a temporary surveillance operation. And if this was a legitimate federal operation, why wasn't local law enforcement notified? In my experience, federal agencies usually coordinated with local police, especially for operations in our jurisdiction. I'm going to need to verify these credentials, Sergeant Williams said, reaching for his radio. And I'll need documentation for this operation. That's when Agent Webb's calm demeanor shifted slightly. Sergeant, I understand your position, but verification could compromise an ongoing investigation. We're tracking individuals who have infiltrated local government and law enforcement. Premature disclosure could put both our operation and your officers at risk. The implication was clear. He was suggesting that someone in our department might be connected to whatever they were investigating. It was a clever deflection, designed to make us hesitant to pursue normal verification procedures. But Webb had made a mistake. One of the monitors on the wall was showing a live feed from inside what looked like City Hall, specifically the mayor's office. I recognized the distinctive wood paneling and the arrangement of furniture. If this was a legitimate federal surveillance operation, they wouldn't be showing us classified feeds so openly. Officer Valdez had been examining the weapons rack more closely. Sergeant, she called quietly, these serial numbers have been filed off. And some of this ammunition isn't standard issue for any federal agency I know of. That was enough for Sergeant Williams. Gentlemen, you're under arrest pending verification of your credentials and the legitimacy of this operation. You have the right to remain silent. What we discovered over the following hours was that Webb and Foster were not federal agents. Their identification cards were sophisticated forgeries, good enough to fool a casual inspection but lacking the security features that would pass detailed scrutiny. The bunker had been under construction for over a year, built gradually during nighttime hours when the area was deserted. The surveillance equipment was real and had been monitoring city government, law enforcement, and local businesses for months. But it wasn't part of any legitimate investigation. Webb and Foster were part of what investigators later described as an anti-government militia group that had been planning some kind of coordinated attack on local government targets. The weapons cache included enough firepower to outfit a small army, all purchased legally but through straw buyers in other states. The surveillance had been gathering information about security procedures, shift schedules, and building layouts for what appeared to be a planned assault on multiple government buildings. What disturbed me most was how long they'd been operating undetected. The bunker was sophisticated enough that it could have remained hidden indefinitely if not for that anonymous tip. Someone had been watching us while we thought we were patrolling an empty lot. The federal authorities who took over the case found connections to similar cells in 4 other states. Webb and Foster were part of a larger network that had been planning coordinated attacks designed to destabilize local governments and create chaos that would, in their minds, spark some kind of revolution. The anonymous caller who reported the sounds and lights was never identified. The FBI believed it might have been someone connected to the group who got cold feet as the operation moved closer to implementation. Or it could have been a completely unrelated person who happened to notice something unusual. We'll probably never know. What I learned from that night is that the threats we face as law enforcement officers aren't always obvious. Sometimes they're literally buried beneath our feet, planned by people who look and sound professional, who can produce official-looking identification, and who have spent months or years preparing for violence while living among us as seemingly normal citizens. The bunker has been filled in with concrete now, and the lot remains vacant. But every time I patrol Industrial Boulevard during my night shift, I find myself wondering, what else is hidden in plain sight? How many other empty lots, abandoned buildings, or quiet neighborhoods are concealing preparations for violence that we haven't discovered yet? Have you ever noticed something in your neighborhood that seemed out of place? Construction activity at odd hours, unusual amounts of traffic to vacant buildings, or people who seem to be watching things too carefully? Sometimes the most dangerous threats are the ones that work hardest to appear normal. After what we'd discovered about the fake Harold Morrison and the underground bunker, I thought I'd developed a better sense for spotting people who weren't what they seemed. But what I learned about our local mail carrier on May 22nd, 2023, made me realize that the most dangerous watchers aren't always hiding. Sometimes they're the ones we see every day and trust completely without question. The call came in at 10:45 a.m. on a Monday. I was working day shift in Unit 15, a 2021 Ford Police Interceptor utility, when dispatch sent me to 1247 Cedar Avenue for a burglary report. The caller, Mrs. Linda Hoffman, said someone had broken into her home over the weekend while she was visiting her sister in Sacramento. Cedar Avenue was in the Westwood neighborhood, one of those middle-class areas where people still felt safe leaving their doors unlocked during the day. Tree-lined streets, well-maintained houses, the kind of place where neighbors actually knew each other, and kids could play outside without constant supervision. When I arrived at 1247, Mrs. Hoffman was waiting on her front porch. She was probably in her 60s, neatly dressed, with the kind of worried expression that comes from having your sense of security violated. Her house was a modest two-story colonial with a well-kept garden and American flag hanging from the front porch. "Officer, thank you for coming so quickly," she said, leading me toward her front door. "I got home yesterday evening, and I knew immediately something was wrong. Nothing major was taken, but someone had definitely been inside." As we walked through her house, Mrs. Hoffman showed me what she'd discovered. It wasn't your typical burglary. The television, jewelry, and electronics were all untouched. Instead, someone had gone through her personal papers, photo albums, and correspondence. Her desk drawers had been carefully searched and reorganized, as if someone was looking for specific information rather than valuables. "They went through my mail," she said, pointing to a stack of letters on her kitchen counter. "Not just the recent stuff, but old bills and documents I keep in that filing cabinet. Everything's been looked at and put back, but not quite in the right order. I'm very organized, officer. I notice when things aren't where I left them." I was documenting the scene when Mrs. Hoffman mentioned something that caught my attention. "The strangest thing is, I think they knew I was going to be gone. I only decided to visit my sister on Friday afternoon, very last minute. But whoever did this seemed to know I wouldn't be home for the weekend." "Did you tell anyone about your travel plans?" I asked. "Just my sister, and maybe mentioned it to my neighbor Mrs. Chin when I asked her to keep an eye on the house." "Oh, and I suppose Tom knew." "Tom? Tom Bradley, our mail carrier. He's been delivering to this route for, must be 8 years now. Very reliable, friendly fellow. I mentioned to him on Friday that I'd be away for the weekend and asked if he could hold my mail until Monday instead of leaving it in the box. You know how it is, mail piling up advertises that nobody's home." Something about this bothered me, but I couldn't put my finger on what exactly. I continued documenting the scene and taking Mrs. Hoffman's statement, but kept thinking about the selective nature of the break-in. Whoever had done this wasn't looking for quick cash or easily fenced items. They were looking for personal information. After finishing at Mrs. Hoffman's house, I decided to canvass the neighborhood to see if anyone had noticed suspicious activity over the weekend. The third house I visited, 1251 Cedar Avenue, gave me information that started to form a disturbing pattern. The resident, Mr. James Walsh, answered the door and immediately seemed eager to talk when I mentioned the burglary at 1247. "Oh, that's terrible," he said. "Mrs. Hoffman is such a nice lady. But you know, I'm not entirely surprised something happened on this street." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Well, we've had a lot of break-ins in this neighborhood over the past 2 years. Not violent stuff, but houses getting entered when people are away. Always very clean jobs, nothing obvious taken, but people notice their personal papers have been disturbed." He paused, thinking. "Come to think of it, in every case I can remember, the people were away for the weekend or on vacation." That got my attention. "How many cases are we talking about?" "At least 6 or 7 houses just on this block and the next one over. The Andersons at 1289, the Patels at 1201, the Rodriguez family at 1278. All the same pattern break-ins when they were away, personal documents searched, but valuables left alone." I asked Mr. Walsh if he reported these incidents, or if any police reports had been filed. He said most people had called it in, but since nothing valuable was stolen and there was no physical damage, the cases hadn't gotten much follow-up. The weird thing is, Mr. Walsh continued, in most cases, the only people who knew they'd be away were family members and Tom, our mail carrier. People always tell Tom when they're going out of town so he can hold their mail. There it was again, Tom Bradley, the mail carrier. I spent the rest of my shift pulling incident reports for the Westwood neighborhood over the past 2 years. What I found was exactly what Mr. Walsh had described, a pattern of break-ins that were far too sophisticated and selective to be random. 14 separate incidents, all targeting personal documents and correspondence, all occurring when residents were away for extended periods. The next morning, I was assigned to follow up on the burglary reports, so I decided to learn more about Tom Bradley. I started by visiting the local post office on Maple Street and speaking with the supervisor, a woman named Carol Martinez who'd been managing the facility for 12 years. Tom Bradley? She said when I asked about him. Oh, Tom's one of our best carriers. Very dedicated, knows his route better than anyone. Been working the Westwood area for 8 years, rarely calls in sick, customers love him. Have there been any complaints about him? Any issues with mail delivery or security? Martinez seemed surprised by the question. Not that I can recall. Tom's very professional. The only unusual thing about him is how much he cares about his customers. He knows all their schedules, their families, their routines. Sometimes I think he knows more about the people on his route than they know about each other. That phrase, knows all their schedules, their families, their routines, sent up a red flag. I asked if I could see Tom's employment records and get his home address for follow-up questions. Tom Bradley lived at 892 Pine Street, about 2 miles from his mail route. It was a small, neat house in an older neighborhood, nothing that suggested unusual wealth or lifestyle. I decided to observe his routine before approaching him directly. Over the next 3 days, I made it a point to be in the Westwood neighborhood during mail delivery hours. What I observed was a mail carrier who was exceptionally thorough and personable. Tom Bradley was probably in his mid-40s, average height and build, with graying hair and the kind of friendly demeanor that made people comfortable talking to him. But as I watched him work, I noticed things that seemed unusual for a typical mail delivery. He spent significantly more time at each house than necessary just to deliver mail. He would chat with residents who were home, asking detailed questions about their lives, their families, their plans. When people weren't home, he would walk around their properties, ostensibly checking for secure places to leave packages, but spending what seemed like excessive time examining windows, doors, and security systems. At one house, I watched him spend nearly 10 minutes talking to an elderly woman about her upcoming doctor's appointments and her son's visit from out of state. At another, he carefully noted which newspapers had piled up and seemed to be counting how many days' worth of mail was accumulating. On Thursday, I decided to approach Tom directly. I waited near his mail truck around 2 p.m. when he was finishing his route. Mr. Bradley? I'm Officer Martinez with Riverside PD. I'm investigating some break-ins in this neighborhood and wondered if I could ask you a few questions. Tom's reaction was interesting. He didn't seem surprised or concerned, just professionally cooperative. Of course, officer. Happy to help. I've been working this route for years, so I notice when things seem out of the ordinary. Have you observed any suspicious activity recently? People who don't belong in the neighborhood, unusual vehicles, anything that struck you as odd? Tom thought for a moment, then shook his head. Nothing that jumps out at me. This is a pretty quiet area. The biggest excitement is usually when someone gets a new car or starts a home improvement project. I understand you know many of your customers personally. They trust you with information about when they'll be traveling? Oh yes, Tom said, brightening. It's part of good customer service. People don't want their mail piling up when they're away. It's a security issue. So they'll let me know when they're going out of town, and I'll hold their mail at the post office until they return. How do you keep track of all that information? I have a good memory for details, Tom replied. And I keep notes to make sure I don't forget. Some of these folks have been on my route for 8 years. You'd get to know their patterns, their routines, when they usually travel. Something about his phrasing bothered me. Notes? What kind of notes? Tom hesitated for just a moment. Just basic stuff to help me do my job better. Who's traveling when, special delivery instructions, that sort of thing. I thanked Tom for his time and let him finish his route, but I was now convinced that the break-ins weren't random. That evening, I called Detective Sarah Kim, who worked property crimes, and filled her in on what I'd discovered. 14 break-ins, all the same pattern, all people who told their mail carrier they'd be away? Detective Kim was immediately interested. That's not a coincidence. We need to get a warrant to search his house and see what kind of notes he's been keeping. The warrant was approved on Friday morning. Detective Kim, myself, and 2 other officers executed the search at Tom Bradley's house on Pine Street. What we found was far more extensive than I'd expected. Tom had converted his basement into what could only be described as a surveillance center focused on his mail route. The walls were covered with detailed maps of the Westwood neighborhood, showing every house, every resident's name, and color-coded information about their schedules, habits, and routines. But it went far beyond just knowing when people traveled. Tom had been documenting the personal lives of everyone on his route for years. He had files on each household containing information that could only have been gathered through systematic observation and eavesdropping: marriage problems, financial difficulties, health issues, family disputes, work schedules, social activities. One wall had a timeline showing when each household would be empty during the coming months, based on vacation plans, business trips, and family visits that residents had mentioned to him. Another section contained what appeared to be practice sketches of house layouts, door and window configurations, and security system details. In a filing cabinet, we found copies of personal documents, utility bills, bank statements, insurance papers that Tom had apparently photographed during his break-ins. He wasn't stealing the documents. He was copying them to build comprehensive profiles of his customers' financial and personal situations. The most disturbing discovery was a series of journals where Tom had recorded his observations and plans. The entries revealed someone who had become obsessed with controlling and manipulating the lives of people on his route. He wrote about protecting certain residents from bad influences and helping others make better decisions by creating situations that would push them in directions he thought were appropriate. In one entry, he described breaking into the Anderson house not to steal, but to plant evidence that Mr. Anderson was having an affair, hoping it would break up a marriage Tom disapproved of. In another, he detailed how he'd been gradually intercepting and destroying certain pieces of mail to isolate an elderly resident from family members he felt were taking advantage of her. Detective Kim found the most chilling evidence in Tom's desk: detailed plans for escalating his involvement in his customers' lives. He had been preparing to move beyond break-ins and surveillance to more direct intervention. There were notes about accidents he could arrange, emergencies he could create, and ways he could position himself as the helpful neighbor who would step in to solve problems he had secretly created. When we arrested Tom Bradley, he didn't deny what we'd found. Instead, he seemed genuinely confused about why we considered his actions criminal. "I was protecting my route," he said during his interview. "These people trusted me with their mail, their packages, their personal information. I was making sure they were safe, that they were making good decisions. I know them better than anyone, better than their own families in some cases." The investigation revealed that Tom's obsession had started gradually. As a conscientious mail carrier, he naturally developed relationships with customers and learned about their lives. But over time, that normal professional interest had evolved into something much darker: a belief that he was responsible for managing and controlling the lives of everyone on his route. The break-ins were just one part of a larger pattern of manipulation and control. Tom had been intercepting mail, redirecting packages, and even impersonating family members in phone calls to gather more information about his customers' private lives. Tom Bradley was charged with multiple counts of burglary, identity theft, mail tampering, and stalking. The Postal Service launched its own investigation into how such extensive criminal activity had gone undetected for so long. What disturbed me most about the case was how perfectly Tom had hidden in plain sight. He was the friendly neighborhood mail carrier, someone people trusted implicitly, someone who had legitimate reasons to know their schedules and have access to their personal information. His customers had willingly shared details about their lives because they saw him as a helpful public servant, not realizing they were feeding information to someone who was using it to violate their privacy and manipulate their lives. The case made me think differently about the people we encounter in our daily routines: the service workers, delivery drivers, maintenance staff, and others who have regular access to our homes and personal information. Most are honest, hardworking people just doing their jobs. But Tom Bradley showed me how someone with bad intentions can exploit the trust we place in familiar faces and official positions. Now when I see mail carriers, utility workers, or other service personnel in the neighborhoods I patrol, I pay closer attention to how they interact with residents and how long they spend at each location. Not because I suspect them all of criminal activity, but because I've learned that the most dangerous predators are often the ones who have found ways to make their presence seem not just normal, but welcome. Have you ever noticed that your mail carrier, delivery driver, or other service worker seem to know an unusual amount about your personal life? Do you think about how much information you share with people who have legitimate reasons to be in your neighborhood regularly? The Tom Bradley case had taught me to look more carefully at the people we trust in our daily routines, but I thought mail carriers were probably the worst of it. I was wrong. What I discovered about a delivery driver in our jurisdiction on June 14, 2023, revealed something far more systematic and disturbing: a criminal operation that had been hiding behind one of the most trusted uniforms in America. It started with what seemed like an unrelated call. I was working day shift in Unit 22, a 2019 Ford Explorer Police Interceptor, when dispatch sent me to 634 Elm Street in the Riverside Gardens neighborhood for a residential alarm activation. The homeowner, Mrs. Rebecca Torres, wasn't answering her phone, and the alarm company had gotten an intrusion alert from her security system. Riverside Gardens was an upscale subdivision where most houses had comprehensive security systems. False alarms were common: pets setting off motion detectors, homeowners forgetting to disarm systems, technical malfunctions. But protocol required us to respond and verify that everything was secure. When I arrived at 634 Elm Street, I immediately noticed something odd. There was a brown delivery truck parked in the driveway, one of those ubiquitous package delivery vehicles that are so common in residential neighborhoods that they're practically invisible. The truck belonged to Rapid Express Delivery, a regional company that competed with the major national carriers. The driver was walking back toward his truck, carrying what appeared to be an electronic signature pad. He was probably in his 30s, wearing the standard brown uniform, and looked exactly like what you'd expect from a professional delivery driver. When he saw my patrol car, he approached with the kind of helpful attitude that suggested he'd been waiting for police to arrive. "Officer, thank goodness you're here," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Kevin Murphy, Rapid Express. I was making a delivery and heard the alarm going off inside. I've been knocking, but nobody's answering." I shook his hand and introduced myself. "The homeowner isn't responding to calls from the alarm company. Did you see anyone leave the property?" "No, sir. I arrived about 10 minutes ago, and the house seemed quiet. I left a package by the front door and was walking back to my truck when the alarm started. Scared the hell out of me, to be honest." Kevin seemed genuinely concerned and helpful. He explained that he'd been delivering packages in this neighborhood for about 3 years and knew Mrs. Torres as a regular customer. "She's usually home during the day, works from home doing something with computers. Very nice lady, always tips well during the holidays." I thanked Kevin for waiting and asked him to stand by while I checked the property. As I approached the front door, I could see his package sitting on the porch, a standard cardboard box with proper shipping labels. The alarm was still audible from inside the house, but all the windows and doors appeared secure from the outside. Following protocol, I radioed for backup and began checking the perimeter of the house. That's when I found the problem. The back door was standing slightly open, and there were fresh tool marks around the lock mechanism. Someone had forced entry into the house. My backup arrived, Officer Lisachin, in a 2020 Chevrolet Tahoe just as I was preparing to enter the house. I filled her in on the situation and mentioned that the delivery driver had been waiting when I arrived. "Did you get his information?" she asked. "Just his name and company. He seems legit, but let me go talk to him again while you cover the back." When I returned to the front of the house, Kevin Murphy was still standing by his truck, looking appropriately concerned. I asked him for his driver's license and employee ID, standard procedure for anyone present at a crime scene. His driver's license showed Kevin James Murphy, age 34, with an address in Stockton. The employee ID looked authentic: Rapid Express delivery logo, photo, employee number, expiration date. Everything seemed normal. "Kevin, I need you to walk me through exactly what happened when you arrived here." "Sure, officer." I pulled into the driveway around 1:20, maybe 1:25. The package was scheduled for delivery today, and I could see Mrs. Torres's car in the garage through the window, so I knew she was home. I grabbed the package and walked to the front door. "Did you ring the doorbell?" "Yes, sir." Rang it twice and waited. When nobody answered, I knocked pretty loudly. Sometimes people are on phone calls or in the shower, you know? I waited maybe 2 minutes, then decided to leave the package and get a signature later. "When did you first hear the alarm?" Kevin paused, thinking. "Right as I was getting back to my truck. Maybe 1:30 or so. I thought about leaving, but I know Mrs. Torres, and it seemed wrong to just drive away with her alarm going off." His story was consistent and reasonable. But something was bothering me about the timeline. The alarm company had called the homeowner at 1:28 p.m. and gotten no response, then called police at 1:32. Kevin claimed he'd arrived at 1:20 to 1:25, but the break-in had happened recently enough that the alarm was still active when I arrived at 1:45. I decided to check inside the house before following up on my concerns. Officer Chin and I cleared the residence room by room. Mrs. Torres wasn't home, but the house had clearly been searched. Drawers had been opened, paper scattered, and several items appeared to be missing: jewelry box emptied, laptop computer gone, some electronics missing from the entertainment center. But here's what was strange: the burglar had been selective and knowledgeable. They'd taken high-value items that were easy to carry and fence, but had left behind other valuable things that were more difficult to move. The 60-inch television was untouched, but the laptop and tablet were gone. Expensive jewelry was missing, but collectible items worth even more were left behind. It was the work of someone who knew exactly what to look for and how long they had to work. While Chin finished documenting the scene, I went back outside to follow up with Kevin Murphy. I wanted to verify his delivery story and get more details about his timeline. "Kevin, can you show me the delivery confirmation for this package?" "Of course," he said, pulling out his electronic device. "Let me look it up." He scrolled through several screens, then frowned. "That's odd. I'm not seeing the delivery confirmation for this address today." "What does that mean?" "Well, when I deliver a package, I'm supposed to get a signature or leave a delivery notice if nobody's home. Then I mark it as delivered in the system. But I don't see any record of attempting delivery here today." That was a red flag. I asked Kevin to walk me through his delivery process step by step. As he explained the procedures, I noticed that his knowledge of company protocols seemed less detailed than I'd expect from a 3-year employee. "Kevin, I'm going to need to verify your employment status. Can you give me a contact number for your supervisor?" For the first time, Kevin seemed less comfortable. "Sure, but they might not be available right now. It's pretty busy this time of day." "That's okay. I'll wait." I called the number Kevin provided and got a generic voicemail message for Rapid Express delivery. While I was waiting for a callback, I decided to take a closer look at Kevin's truck and equipment. The truck looked authentic. Proper logos, license plates, were consistent with regular use. But when I looked more closely at the packages in the back, something seemed off. There were only about 6 packages for a delivery route that should have dozens. And the addresses on the packages were all in the same general area, all expensive neighborhoods like Riverside Gardens. Officer Chin joined me as I was examining the truck. Find anything interesting inside? Yeah, a few things. The burglar knew exactly what to look for and where to find it. This wasn't a random break-in by someone looking for quick cash. Someone had been in this house before. You think our helpful delivery driver might know more than he's telling us? That's what I'm starting to think. His story has some holes, and I'm having trouble verifying his employment. We approached Kevin together. I decided to ask more detailed questions about his route and schedule. Kevin, how many deliveries do you usually make per day? Oh, it varies. Maybe 40 to 50 packages on a busy day. And today? How many deliveries are you scheduled for? Kevin checked his device again. Let me see, looks like about 30 packages today. But you only have 6 packages in your truck right now. Kevin looked genuinely surprised. Oh, those are just the ones left for this area. I already delivered most of my route this morning. So Mrs. Torres's package was one of your last deliveries? That's right. But when I looked at the shipping labels on the remaining packages, they all had delivery dates from 2 days ago. These weren't packages scheduled for today, they were packages that should have been delivered already. I radioed for a supervisor and called Detective Kim, who had worked the Tom Bradley case with me. While waiting for them to arrive, I continued questioning Kevin about his work history and route details. His answers became increasingly vague and inconsistent. When Detective Kim arrived, she immediately noticed the same discrepancies I'd spotted. She asked Kevin to consent to a search of his truck, and he agreed, probably because refusing would have looked suspicious. What we found in the truck's storage compartments was evidence of a sophisticated burglary operation. Hidden beneath the legitimate delivery supplies were tools for bypassing security systems, a collection of house keys, and detailed notes about dozens of homes in upscale neighborhoods throughout the region. The notes included information that could only have been gathered through multiple visits to these homes: security system types, door and window configurations, daily schedules of residents, locations of valuable items, and detailed floor plans. We also found copies of shipping receipts and delivery records for hundreds of packages, information that would tell someone exactly when expensive items were being delivered to specific addresses. When confronted with this evidence, Kevin's story began to fall apart. Detective Kim arrested him on suspicion of burglary and possession of burglary tools. During the subsequent investigation, we learned that Kevin Murphy was not actually employed by Rapid Express Delivery. He had been operating a stolen delivery truck and wearing a uniform purchased online. His method was brilliantly simple. He would monitor package deliveries to identify homes receiving expensive items, then pose as a delivery driver to case the properties. During legitimate-looking delivery attempts, he would gather information about security systems, daily routines, and the layout of homes. When residents weren't home, he would use his lock-picking tools to gain entry and steal high-value items that he could quickly fence. The delivery truck provided perfect cover. Neighbors and security systems would see a normal delivery vehicle, not a burglar. The investigation revealed that Kevin had been operating this scheme for over 2 years, targeting more than 200 homes across 4 counties. He had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of property while appearing to be just another hardworking delivery driver. What made his operation particularly effective was that he would sometimes make legitimate package deliveries to build credibility with residents and neighbors. He had actually delivered packages to some of the homes he later burglarized, creating a pattern of trust that gave him access to detailed information about his targets. The case connected to several other investigations throughout the region. Police departments in 3 counties had been investigating similar burglaries, always targeting homes where expensive items had recently been delivered, always occurring when residents were away, always involving someone with detailed knowledge of the properties. Kevin Murphy was eventually charged with over 180 counts of burglary, identity theft, and fraud. The stolen delivery truck had been taken from a Rapid Express facility 6 months earlier, and the company had been unaware it was still being used for deliveries. What disturbed me most about this case was how easily Kevin had exploited our trust in delivery services. We're so accustomed to seeing delivery trucks in our neighborhoods that we barely notice them anymore. Drivers have legitimate reasons to approach every house, to ask questions about residents' schedules, and to observe security systems and valuable items. The case also highlighted how vulnerable we are during the brief window when expensive purchases are being delivered. Online shopping has created a steady stream of valuable packages being delivered to homes throughout the day, and criminals have found ways to exploit that vulnerability. After the Kevin Murphy case, I started paying closer attention to delivery vehicles in the neighborhoods I patrol. Most are legitimate, of course, but I now look for trucks that seem to be spending too much time at individual houses, drivers who are asking too many questions, or vehicles that don't quite match the professional standards of major delivery companies. This case, combined with the Harold Morrison surveillance operation, the underground bunker, and Tom Bradley's mail route manipulation, taught me that the most dangerous criminals are often the ones who have found ways to make their presence seem not just normal, but welcome. They exploit our trust in familiar uniforms, official-looking vehicles, and professional behavior to gain access to our homes and personal information. The 4 cases were connected by a common theme: people who had found ways to weaponize trust. Whether it was a fake neighbor, armed militants, a manipulative mail carrier, or a fraudulent delivery driver, each had discovered that the best way to commit crimes was to first become someone that victims would never suspect. Have you ever noticed delivery drivers who seem to spend too much time at houses, ask unusual questions, or seem to know more about residents' schedules than they should? Do you think about how much access we give to people in uniforms who appear to be doing legitimate work in our neighborhoods? Thanks so much for watching. I can't express enough how much your support means. The likes, the comments, it all really helps the channel grow. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I always take the time to read them. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on any new videos. See you next time.